Hi, and welcome to part two of my series on Sergeants, the Miniatures game. In this particular case, Day of Days. In this second part of my series of videos, I'm going to talk about setup of the game and actually how to get going. We're not going to delve into gameplay quite yet, but concentrate on setting up the map, setting up your decks, and setting up your teams and squads to start a game. The first thing we want to take a look at is the Day of Days scenario book. Each one of the releases of Sergeants will include a scenario book. In this particular case, we're going to take a look at the first scenario called First Contact. The scenario book is laid out really well. Each one of the scenarios gives you a situation report, which is just kind of general information on what's going on in that particular battle. It'll also tell you if there are specific soldiers or character cards that need to be included. Secondarily, it tells you about your orders, how to set up the orders decks and how to draw them. It goes into the orders of battle or how to set up your individual teams, squads, whatever level for each side, the Americans and the Germans. And then it gives special instructions. Down here it talks about how to set up the story deck and any special victory point conditions, things like that. One note in this one is that it's pre-dawn, it's nighttime outside, so you can only sight up to three map squares, for example. And then also it shows us how to set up the map. We're going to go through and take a look at each one of these steps to include building the map, getting completely ready to play the game. The first thing we want to do is take a look at the situation report. This tells us that there's particular characters that have to be chosen. In this case, we're going to take, for the Americans, Sergeant Harrison and Private Fields. And then on the Germans, we've got Mayer, and I believe it's pronounced Dreyer, that we'll be taking for those two particular sides. So we'll start out with the Americans and get them here on the table. Okay, the scenario booklet told us that we had to take two different soldiers. And when we look inside the game, we're going to find that we have those two soldiers inside here. And this is Sergeant Harrison and Private Fields. Now, these guys we have to take, so we're going to set those aside. And I'm going to look through and find my other two characters. Now, in Day of Days, you only get 4 soldiers, the 2 characters and then 2 other soldiers, the randomly generated type. In this case, the 2 I received were 3 victory points apiece. So I've got them also. I have all of the figures and dog tags, and then I've got some grenade markers here. And this deck is the 7 cards from each one of the soldiers that I will shuffle together and make my action deck. The scenario says that in this particular case, we also get, besides the 2, Harrison and Fields, we get 12 victory points of additional troops and up to 1 additional leader. Now, I've chosen to only show you the game with the components that ship with it, so that people understand that you can play it with a smaller group of soldiers. I have other soldiers. I like to play a more robust game, but in this particular case, this is what you may have if you get Day of Days. Now, I've got 6 additional points here. It also says I can distribute up to 6 grenade markers amongst my soldiers, and I can do that in any order that I want. There's no particular manner, so I'm going to give these people, or these soldiers, 2 grenades each, and these 2 1 apiece. Now, if I want to, the scenario book also says that I can buy additional grenades, 2 additional grenades for each victory point spent. So I'm going to give these guys each 1 more grenade. So everyone has 2. I've now spent 6, 7 victory points on top of what the scenario book tells me that I'm supposed to have for the Americans. And this will be my American force for the scenario First Contact. Okay, the next thing I may want to do is to take a look at the orders. Now I have an orders deck that comes with Day of Days. It has several cards in it, but it instructs me that I'm supposed to take particular cards, 3 for each side, in this case 61, 62, and 64, and then 59, 60, and 63 for the 2 sides. I've already done that and pulled those 3 cards out for each side. Here are the 3 for the Germans, and here are the 3 for the Americans. I shuffle these up, and I choose 1 for each side. This will then be their orders for the remainder of the game, unless something happens to change that, like a particular event on the storyline. In this particular case, for the Americans, I pulled out prisoners, gained 7 victory points for each captured enemy. That's the bonus. Down here, skirmish. On turn 2, enter at any unused entry area, kill over half the enemy soldiers encountered. And if I succeed, I get 13 victory points. For the Germans, we'll shuffle up again, and we'll choose 1 at random. In this case, I got number 63. Again, it has a bonus on here. Survival. Soldiers surviving count half victory points. And attack. Capture over half the landmarks in play. Success gains 7 victory points per captured landmark. Now, these order cards are not shown to your opponent during the game. These will stay secret. They go next to the board, hidden. Only you know what you're trying to do if you're playing one or the other side. The next thing I do is I take a look at the special instructions, and down here it tells me to build the story deck. The story deck has a bunch of cards in it, and in this particular case they tell me to remove 17, 18, 19, 20, 27, 28, and 29, those cards. I've already taken the liberty to do that, not to bore you with taking cards out of a deck, and I set these aside. Those are not used for the game, however these are. I will then shuffle these, and this becomes the story deck that I'm going to draw my 3 story cards each turn from. Again, we'll get to that during gameplay, but that's how it works, and again, very clearly spelled out in each one of the scenarios. Setting up the map. We have a ton of these tiles. I'm not going to show you all of them. They cover the table here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the map in accordance with the scenario booklet. The map's very clearly denoted here. On each one of the tiles, we see that it's clearly marked like 10A. So 10A in this particular case would go right down here when we're building the map. You just follow along the instructions. The border is explained very well inside the rule book, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. You just lay it out exactly like the book says. Fortunately, with the border also, because of the puzzle piece edges, they only go one way, so it's really difficult to mess it up. You might get a couple switched side to side, which really doesn't matter so much. But certainly you're not going to end up with this one, for example, on the side where it's not supposed to go. Again, very clearly defined within the rules. So bear with me a moment while we build the map and get ready for setup and start of gameplay. Okay, and let's see, wrong side. Here we go. That completes my map. Now this map has been set up in accordance with scenario 1. Everything's in place, including the border, and again, the instructions explain very well how to get this border in place. The next thing I would want to do is to take my American side, for example. Here's their action deck. There's a draw deck space right here. And then I'm going to place my soldiers. This is no secret. The sides kind of know who's there. So they're just going to go here. There's a place on each side for soldiers to be laid out, up to 6 on a small map. I'll go back and give them their 2 grenades apiece again. And then, if you recall in the scenario, it says that they won't enter until turn 2. So I'm just going to set them off to the side for right now. They've just jumped in, sailing out of their aircraft, heading toward the pastures of Normandy. Now, the Germans, just the opposite. I'm going to take my Germans, and over here, I'm going to lay out their 4 cards, along with the 2 grenades that I decided to give them and stick with. In this particular case, there is no setup for the Germans because they can enter whatever they want to. They're not there. They're not on the map yet. Now, I take the German action deck, made up of the 7 cards from each one of the Germans, just like the American action deck, and I'm going to place it over here in the German draw pile area. Lastly, I'm going to take the story deck. Again, it has all the cards removed the scenario said to have removed, and then The phase deck is going to go over here. They call it a phase deck, story deck, but essentially it goes over on the side of the map. And then lastly, each one of the sides have their orders. I generally just tuck those under the side over here so I can refer to them if I can't remember what my orders are. And here we're ready to begin. We have an assembled map in accordance with the scenario booklet. We've chosen our forces. In this case, a small team of Americans versus a small team of Germans. Those are both done again within the boundaries of the scenario. We've created the action decks. Those are created of the 7 cards from each one of the soldiers that you've chosen for the scenario. And then lastly, we created a story deck. Again, scenario driven. We removed several cards from it, shuffled them up, and we're ready to go. The last thing that we need to do is get our rulers out and some pen markers and begin play, which I'll start talking about in part 3. Again, thanks for joining me for part 2 of this video series. This is Sergeant's Day of Days miniatures game by Lost Battalion Games and designed by Jeff Billings. Again, thanks for listening.